we're hyper individualized. So we don't think about neighborhood. And even though we might be proud of the city we're from, we're often disconnected from our neighbors. So it's really important. I think one of the ways I think is so important about saying the neighborhood is a unit of change is to actually connect us back to one another and to have us think more broadly than our just individual households and think about my neighbor.
Welcome to Place Matters, a podcast about the intersection of race, place, and poverty. We will explore the belief that the path towards ending inequity and promoting prosperity is through the work of holistic neighborhood development. The content for this podcast is based on over 45 years of experience, expertise, failure, and hope from our organization, Focused Community Strategies, better known as FCS. This is the Foundations series, where we will talk about the big ideas and core frameworks that make FCS, well, FCS. I am Sean Duncan, the Director of Training and Consulting for FCS and the host for Place Matters. I'm embarrassed to admit that it wasn't until I was in college that I met poverty up close. It was then that poverty ceased being a vague concept or issue, but a tangible, oppressive reality for real people whose names I knew. And it took encountering individuals to get me into this work. I saw pain and I wanted to do something about it. And I think my story isn't uncommon, that many of us get into this because we want to help individuals. And much of the existing paradigm for poverty alleviation is based on that framing as well, assuming that the unit of social change when it comes to poverty is the individual. Sometimes we expand that to say that the unit of social change is the family or the household. Now, we would never deny the agency of the person or the impact of nurturing relationships, but ironically, if we want to see things improve for families, children, or individuals, then focusing directly on them isn't the best way to bring about change. What we really need to do is look at the neighborhood. Joining me today as we talk about the neighborhood as the unit of change are two of our lead consultants, Stephen Cosby and David Park. So it's common for us at FCS to say that neighborhoods are the unit of change. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we think about the work of community development, when we're trying to improve a place or spark any kind of positive change, it's best done at the neighborhood level. I think that's innately how people see the places they live and how they move through them and experience them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for us, being able to communicate that if you, and we've talked about this before, where there's not a limit of people who are concerned about chronic social issues, material poverty, et cetera. There's not a limit of people who want to engage and generously care for people who are oppressed by these forces. And as much as we want people to give, to engage, to be generous, when we say neighborhood's a unit of change, if you want to see long-term impact and actual change generationally, the unit of change you need to be focused on is a neighborhood, as a particular unit.
Well, that's a paradigm shift, I think, for a lot of people, because most often we think of the unit of change being the individual or the family level. Yep. And I think that's where, a lot of charities, nonprofits, we start because we care about somebody or we learned somebody's name and we became friends with them and learned of their predicament. And that's why we initially always think of not neighborhood as the unit of change, but the person.
Yeah. Yeah. Even, I mean, like it's a common success story that we got that individual out of that neighborhood. Right. Like we see the person, we're drawn in compassionately by the hurt that they're experiencing. Like, what can we do to ensure they're getting out, right? So we're actually working against the neighborhood unit and saying like it's that family or that individual.
I think also from the kind of the structural side or like, planners and policy folks, I think can look at communities and see like census tracts or zip codes or think about like city or county divisions or departments, because of how these different programs that are designed to address the needs that we see in these communities are funded and how they're organized. And it's, I think, a lot easier to get data, publicly accessible data at census tract or zip code levels. And so putting things in the form of a neighborhood, which is those boundaries don't align with anything else. You know, it makes it kind of difficult from the start. So I think it's kind of one step farther than folks who are kind of working within the structures are really thinking a lot of times.
Yeah, I think like maybe too much of a generalization, but I think there are charities or nonprofits that kind of, they see the individual, they see the family, they kind of work at that very personalized level. Then like your civic or maybe public or private are thinking at that larger regional or city or even zip code or county level. And we're trying to say like, hey, there's this neighborhood piece that has to be, that's where long-term transformation is going to happen. It's the one that kind of gets missed. But what we're not saying is, hey, don't care about individual people or families, right? So but what are the limits of that though? If you're not thinking of the neighborhood unit, you're only engaging that individual or that family, what's the limit to that? Like why would that not have maybe the impact we want?
What's that old adage where it's like if a person falls in the river, like if it happens once or twice, it's maybe it's the person's fault, but then if it keeps happening, you have to look farther upstream to find out why are people falling in and what is it structurally that needs to change. So I think it's a little bit of zooming out from that, where the individual or certain characteristics that are factors in that person's life aren't sort of more like they're affecting maybe whole groups of people. I think that's where it's good to zoom out, but maybe not zoom out too far to the city or district level.
I mean, I think that's where the paradigm shift you mentioned earlier is that I think for a lot of folks, the neighborhood is a neutral entity, right? That it's like the people, like it would be hard for, I think, a lot of folks to say, okay, I see bodies in the river. Okay, I'm smart enough now to go, someone's pushing them in upstream. I got to go upstream and figure that out. I don't think most people would say it's a neighborhood causing those things to happen, right? I think there's a host of other things they might point to, like, underemployment or unemployment or broken family, or they might point to all these other kind of like, that's what's pushing people in, racist policies and all these, there's a truth to all of this, right? But it's like very few people go like, well, what's sending people into that river is that neighborhood.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's not intuitive. I do think it does take a paradigm shift to recognize that the factors that affect a neighborhood are able to be changed in a way that's constructive. Whereas I think at the city or zip code level, it starts to be, you can mask a lot of things or start to, the factors that affect one neighborhood don't affect the other the same way. So I do think it is somewhat of a shift from recognizing that the personal influences need to be zoomed out. And then we have to think about neighborhood as a way of saying like, there's multiple systems that affect even this small geography, but that are really impactful.
And just like we wouldn't say, or we're not saying don't focus on individuals or don't think about families, we also wouldn't say don't worry about city level change or state level change or county level change. We're like, yes, we want to see systemic full scale change, but what is the limit of that? If you're only operating there and you're not pulling into neighborhood space, what is the limit of kind of only functioning at that kind of level?
Yeah, I mean, I think to David's point, you start to mask some of the issues that are really affecting life in some neighborhoods versus others. I know here in Atlanta, you can cross over a major road and you have kind of a disinvested community on one side, and on the other side, it's a neighborhood that's, taking off in terms of development and their economy. And so I think that that looking at too large an area, zooming out too much, can really kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a washout effect. That you're not really narrowing in on the real causes and the real kind of lived realities of what people are experiencing in a place. I mean, in the ways that we see access to goods and services, transit routes and, I mean, all the rest, I think those are very specific to not just cities, but individual neighborhoods.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely been times where people have spoken data points about this census zip code where FCS is located. And if you based our work on that information, FCS would be doing radically different things, because there are some realities, a couple neighborhoods south of here, and even west of here, that like they're included in that data set. And if all funding or interventions are based on that data set, like largely the neighborhood of historic South Atlanta is like, none of this is helping us. Like those, that's a very real reality for that neighborhood and for that one. But for us, it's not impacting our quality of life in any real way. And so we're saying, yeah, let's do let's care well for people. Like, let's do systemic change. But at some level, the unit of change that's going to be most impactful is that kind of neighborhood piece, which isn't an accident, right? There's a history of why our neighborhoods have taken the shape that they've taken. Redlining being one that's probably more commonly known. So Stephen, say a bit about that idea of how redlining, or the history of decisions that have been made. We didn't get here by accident. Like, neighborhoods as they were created this way, and not just a few individuals made a decision. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think that that the idea of redlining, is fairly well known. I mean, it's when the Homeowners Loan Corporation in 1938 created a series of maps, that guided investment in cities across America. And the redlining, really the areas where they designated them to be the most risky investments in terms of, offering up home loans and small business loans, were shaded red on the map. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you had your kind of green neighborhoods where investments were seen as more of a safe bet. But I think it really we need to back up the train a little bit more, because I think it really relied heavily on race-based zoning ordinances, which were in place in Atlanta and Los Angeles and other parts of the country from the 19-teens and 20s on. Atlanta tried to enact a race-based zoning ordinance in the early 20s, and it was stopped by the state Supreme Court. But that really kind of set the map, so to speak, in terms of where white neighborhoods and black neighborhoods were to be located. And I think it's really hard to kind of rewrite the narrative of a community after those markers have been put in the ground, because we see, fast forward a few decades through, urban renewal and model cities and these patterns of investment or disinvestment and then erasure when it comes to these urban renewal projects throughout major cities really kind of harken back to that original race-based zoning ordinance.
And so redlining wasn't like materialized as its own independent thing. They heard housing covenants and other zoning things have been going on for decades prior, and that just gave banks, thank you for creating the template for me. I now know to not invest in these black neighborhoods, and I will invest in these white neighborhoods. There was was having a conversation with someone about a city not too far from Atlanta, and just the way racially how neighborhoods are shaped the way that they are. And they're like, well, they are just choosing to live where they're choosing to live, and we're just choosing to live where we're choosing to live. So this idea that this is just a work of just personal choice, and that there wasn't housing covenant said, no, you can't live here, right? Or there wasn't like, well, if I can't afford a home as a black or brown person, I can't get one over there. I can't get the loan that you're getting, or I can't get at the rate you're getting. That like our neighborhoods were produced to be what they are, right?
The game's been rigged a certain way. And even some like a harmless cliche, like there goes the neighborhood. Yeah. I mean,
where does that come from?
That comes from a certain way of thinking about who gets to live near each other. And it's really, a blemish is the lightest way to say it, but it's a horrible sin that our nation's committed against brown and black folks. And I think like to repair it, then I think, like you said, you have to think about neighborhood differently. And because I think the lack of social cohesion and even, modern ways, we have social media, but we're more we're hyper individualized. So we don't think about neighborhood. And even though we might be proud of the city we're from, we're often disconnected from our neighbors. So it's really important. I think one of the ways I think is so important about saying the neighborhood is a unit of change is to actually connect us back to one another and to have us think more broadly than our just individual households and think about my neighbor.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important thing to acknowledge and see the neighborhoods that were actually demolished for these large scale civic projects to be constructed in Atlanta and across America.
Interstates for one.
I mean, you know, you saw a lot of social cohesion and people caring for each other and taking care of each other's kids and when you're sick. And, you know, I mean, I think that when you tear down a neighborhood, you know, it is not just the destruction of, you know, of physical structures or, you know, roads and bridges and homes. You know, you are tearing apart social fabric. You know, and I think to just send folks out with, you know, Section 8 vouchers or just, you know, into a housing market that is not built to give them home ownership opportunities, you know, it really just continues to build on the insult, you know, and the injustice of those systems that were created to begin with.
Yeah, and I think part of the awareness of the legacy of these things, right? Like, is that it's not just about housing, right? The lack of investment in home loans or the lack of ability for Black and brown communities to own their own homes. Like, even though the policy is very kind of housing driven, to your point, like that shredded the fabric of that entire neighborhood. Like the infrastructure, like that wasn't just, can this person afford a mortgage? Like that's a disinvestment in the whole infrastructure of what makes that neighborhood a neighborhood, right?
That's right.
And so, like, you know, we use like the other side of the tracks, right? It's like, that's not an accident, right? There wasn't just, the railroad track happens to be right between the white and black part of town. It's like, no, there's a reason why it cut off that neighborhood from the rest of the city. And it may not be a railroad track. It could be, I mean, we've visited one of our clients. It's a river. Like, they're on that side of the river. We're on this side of the river. You know, and in Atlanta, it's often railroads, but it's often interstates. Like you can draw our interstates. Like this one cut. I mean, it would make logical sense for some of our interstates to go in a straight line, but it kind of dips and curves in places that's just like we're cutting. These are deliberate, right, decisions that have, again, while we would say like, yes, love and focus on individuals, yes, think about systems change, but the place where the people are getting pushed in the river, to your example, like that, it's what we've done with neighborhoods, right? And that's where we've got to. Now we could say, okay, so it's over 50 years since the Fair Housing Act is passed. To say, okay, all that was unconstitutional. Not only was it just bad or wrong, but like it's unconstitutional to have done any and all of that. We can't discriminate. Some would say, hey, it's been 55 years since that act was passed. So we're good now, right? Why are we still talking about this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, you know, you look at the technical provisions of the Fair Housing Act, and I mean, they prohibit discrimination based on a whole range of characteristics, you know, and I think moving forward from that point, it infused a measure of justice into the equation, right? You know, from that point forward, those renting or selling homes could not discriminate based on these conditions, you know, but I think it didn't do much in terms of kind of injecting equity into the system in a retroactive way, because those neighborhood patterns, you know, what were black neighborhoods, what were white neighborhoods, you know, were already kind of drawn out on the map, so to speak. And unfortunately, I mean, as cities across the country are looking for, you know, new residents and new tax revenue, you know, this idea that neighborhoods that were predominantly black or you know, people of color are just there to be redeveloped. And never in a way that we would look into like a predominantly white neighborhood to be redeveloped. That it's, you know, it seems like it's a blank slate. We can just kind of remake this neighborhood and in our own image. And I think that continues to add to the grievance. You know? So
it's preventative. You can no longer keep doing this, but it's not reparative in saying like, hey, we've spent generations creating the reality that we're now in. Okay, that was wrong. Let's not do that anymore. But we now have generations where the whole foundation of a neighborhood is weak, you know, versus others have had generations of continual investment that's just cumulative and cascading effect of investment, right? And we're going, oh, well, you know, but even if investment patterns and laws were all perfectly equitable right now, which they're not, like you're not dealing with the legacy of what's kind of been left behind. But what we're finding is like it's not even perfectly equitable. If you look at the way what properties are being bought by private equity firms, Wall Street investors.
That's right.
Where are, like, because there's articles about the number of properties bought by investors in Atlanta kind of writ large, but you zero in, like, there's a disproportionate purchasing from those same neighborhoods that were, because one of the outcomes of that is like there may be a lot of residents there, but there's not a lot of homeowners in those spaces. So it becomes really easy to say, all right, well, now I'm like, before I wouldn't invest in your space, so you can't own in your space. And now that the market's changing, I want to invest in your place, but it's to extract and to take, right?
Right.
And so we're still in a space of like, neighborhoods continue to be weakened by the legacy of these things.
I mean, and I think, you look at the federal level and like the creation of opportunity zones, several years ago, and how they were used as really just kind of a cash cow for developers, to go in and to, to reap these benefits and rewards on these same Black and brown communities, that were targeted for redevelopment, but it was done in a way that erased communities, that left neighbors out of the mix when it came to determining how they wanted to see their own community developed. And so I think that money and developers are always going to find a way, to get in there, and that it happens to be in mostly Black and brown communities, I think is no coincidence.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a direct correlation between the red line communities versus the communities that were the highest impacted by mortgage fraud, mortgage crisis in 2008. Like this is not random data points on the map. There's a direct line between this. And so thankfully more and more research is coming out to show how many life outcomes are directly correlated to the neighborhood that you grow up in, right? That if you list it, what deals with health or wealth or well-being, there is a direct correlation to the place you're growing up. David, talk about some of the work you've looked at, even just with like income mobility is one of those indicators. Yeah, how the neighborhood affects that.
So you're talking about one of my academic crushes on Raj Chetty at Harvard and his work with the Opportunity Atlas and Opportunity Insights. I think one of the first papers that was presented was research on income mobility and the idea that the American dream, is it alive or is it largely defunct? And it's definitely shows, the research shows that many of us don't make the same amount as our parents did at the same age, age of 35. So what our parents made as an income at their age of 35 versus what their children make, it's been steadily going down for decades, in the aggregate. But if you start to map that out geographically, you start, it's not happening to everybody equally. Yeah. So if you start
on average, that doesn't really count for what's happening.
Which means, if you look at an aggregate, we should all be suffering a little bit. We should all, be, not making as much as our parents did, but it's not that way. If you map it out and you start, coding it by zones and start thinking about it, it's like, there's certain neighborhoods that are really affected and not experiencing any income mobility. Yeah. Why is that? And when you start to hold sort of fixed the idea let's just hold these two neighborhoods equal. Let's start to track if they move if residents from this neighborhood move to that neighborhood, holding age, looking at their age that they moved and seeing the effect on their income as they grow to be adults. You start to see that children who move from lower income mobility neighborhoods, when they have the chance to move early in their lives at the age of 2, they have almost the same income as somebody who grew up in that higher income mobility neighborhood. Yep. But then every year that they stay in a lower income or lower income mobility neighborhood, their income as an adult also goes down. So that shows us two things, is that neighborhoods definitely matter. And then secondly is that the longer you're in a lower income mobility neighborhood, the more it affects you as you grow older. So childhood environment starts to become we really need to pay attention to that. So it sparked a sort of nationwide sort of obsession with childhood environment. But they had to really correlate it and be honest with themselves about it's our neighborhoods that are affecting our income mobility, not the person's intelligence and preferences, choices. It's not that at all, which is a real game changer in the way we think about like we talked about before. It's not just the individual's fault or their greatness. It's actually the effect of the neighborhood. Yeah.
And that idea of you could have two people who have all the exact same data points, descriptors, complete mirror image of each other. And if you grew up in this neighborhood versus this one, your income mobility is gonna be radically different.
That's right.
And it's just the block you're growing up on. So why shouldn't we so why isn't the success story? Let's just get people out.
Yeah. So if neighborhood matters and a successful neighborhood matters more than sort of a non-successful, then the idea is like, well, let's take all the people that aren't succeeding or don't have income mobility, let's move them to a place where they do. Well, you're going to have that idea of moving to opportunity is often limited by space and the limit of price and affordability.
How many people can you do that with?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If you put everybody in this sinking ship into this one, it's like, well, you're going to run out of room.
Yeah.
Number one, and then and one of my fears is social cohesion starts to evaporate, right? So there are reasons why people don't want to move into a different neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so that becomes prohibitive at a certain level. The second opportunity then, or the second way of approach of thinking of place as the unit of change is to invest in lower income neighborhoods and really begin, invest in neighborhoods and making sure that they have opportunities and certain things are built structurally around them, as well as the social cohesion that allows that neighborhood to flourish.
Yeah. But it's not just income mobility, right? There are lots of other indicators that same deal. Two people, exact same. If you grew up in this neighborhood versus this one, life expectancy. So people grow up in this neighborhood versus a neighborhood a couple streets away, they're going to live 7 years longer than if you grow up here, right? Brain development of children. I mean, they've scanned and tracked children in the lower income neighborhoods and just what's been called toxic stress and like what it does to the ability for the brain to develop, and which obviously is affect reading and learning and all the other kind of things that are going on. So there's this just being able to find there's not a life outcome that you can point to that doesn't connect to, well, where did you grow up? And had you grown up 2 neighborhoods over, like these would be significantly different indicators that exist.
Yeah, and it's frightening how drastic those differences can be in adjacent neighborhoods.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Yeah, that's what's really tragic.
Yeah.
Is that if you were just on the other side of the tracks, you could have lived a decade longer and maybe made, 20,000 more a year. You can just imagine the ripple effects it has on a person's family and their self-esteem and their, health.
Yeah, and this is why I think it's so important for us to know and acknowledge those historic barriers, that, from race-based zoning forward, those boundary lines were drawn and they are hard and fast. And we see them still yielding, this really bitter fruit in terms of limited life outcomes and success for kids who grew up in them, and I think what it starts to do after a while is it kind of, people are desensitized to the pain and the suffering and the lack of opportunity that people experience in certain neighborhoods, that it's almost like they think, well, it's got to be somewhere.
Yeah.
Like everybody can't thrive, and so
we assume it's inevitable. Poverty's inevitable.
Whatever we tell ourselves, I think it's justifying like, well, we can't save everybody. We can't invest in every neighborhood to the level that it needs to be, and I mean, I've seen this, firsthand on the West Side where it's, people will claim, oh, we've poured X million dollars into this neighborhood and nothing's changed. Well, when you're just pouring money in and there's no real strategy behind trying to, like we've been talking about, really affect life outcomes and really do that in a people-centered way. It's kind of bound to fail.
Yeah, you can take the maps of Atlanta, back with racialized zoning, lay that map down, lay down the redlining map. You can then begin to lay down a current map of like 2020 of childhood ER visits because of asthma. And you're like, oh, it's all the same places, right? I mean, there's direct correlation to what. And so like now that a new stadium gets built, all these millions flow into these under-resourced neighborhoods. And we somehow think that like 5 years of lots of money going in is going to undo generations of disinvestment. It's like, well, I'm glad there's attention now. I'm glad there's some dollars that are willing to come, but like, are you really willing to do the reparative work that it's going to take? That's going to take, I mean, it took generations to get here, and it's going to take decades to undo and redo that level of work, that kind of work to move us forward. So this is why when we talk about neighborhoods, often we use the metaphor of neighborhoods as an ecosystem. So say something about why that metaphor? What do we mean by that when we talk about neighborhoods as ecosystems?
Yeah, I mean, when we think of an ecosystem, it's kind of a combination of systems that are either working together in healthy ways or unhealthy ways. And when something endangers the health of that ecosystem, it conditions are such that that it produces unhealthy organisms. And so I think that we've got to see our neighborhoods as these ecosystems that are really precious, and we have to make sure that the balances are just right. There's a lot of attention that has to be paid to making sure that that you're providing opportunity for people in ways that they need it and are going to feel it, that's going to impact their life outcomes. It has to do with the physical built environment. It has to do with people's physical health and workforce opportunities, income, and all the rest. But I think seeing it as kind of a combination of these systems is really helpful, because I think that's how people encounter it and experience it.
And just the idea that whatever you do affects the whole, or whatever you don't do affects the whole. Like, even though a lot of the racist policies that weaken neighborhoods were housing related, those housing related actions, investments, disinvestments, affected the whole thing. There's not a system not impacted by the work of that housing, because if it's an ecosystem, whether it's schools or businesses or streets or sidewalks or safety or how much greenery there is and the air quality, like it affected everything, right? And so to say, when we talk about an ecosystem, we all, like, for example, we all know there's an affordable housing crisis, Atlanta and every other major city, right? But we would go, yes, please invest in more affordable housing. But if it's not done with that lens of how it affects the whole ecosystem, there's plenty of examples, and there's some not too far from here where lots of affordable housing was created and it just ripple effect so many other negative things because it wasn't done with, like, how does this intervention and not just try to be like a point solution. It's just this individual need that we're filling, but how does this can be designed and executed in a way that's ecosystem kind of driven. How would you maybe contrast? So, FCS isn't the only place-based organization out there. With others that are doing place-based work, how would you maybe contrast our particular approach or our unique lens with this, with other things you've seen out there?
Well, I think going back to the points we made before is that you can be place-based and still be focusing on individuals or focusing too much in ways that aren't thinking about the whole. So, and I think in my world, churches are a great example of place. They are based in a place, but they often aren't thinking about the neighborhood, or they're not really thinking about the whole system. So when they're sort of engrossed in what is happening within their four walls, they can say, like, we're the First Baptist Church of so and so, but it really just the fact that they're in a place is incidental and therefore not really contributing to the health of the whole place.
Yeah. I think there's some place-based organizations that would hear everything we've described about the history and rationale, the evidence of outcomes and indicators of people's lives. They would agree with everything that we've said. Therefore, their work is doing a lot of development projects in the lower income neighborhoods, the ones historically disinvested in. However, there's a lack of connectivity to the social fabric, the people on the ground.
That's right.
So it's really, and it's on one hand, it's like, you don't want to throw shade on multi-million-dollar housing or economic investments. Like, yes, these neighborhoods are finally getting this, but like, give me some names of some people that are in this neighborhood and how they're a part of it. And so I would say, for me, that's a distinguishing mark of FCS's approach, that we go at the pace of trust. Like, we work in partnership with local leaders of that neighborhood, because neighborhoods are used to being acted upon. And we've listed history of negative acting upon, but even positive things that are acting upon are problematic, right? That you're still not dealing with that fundamental issue of power and agency, right? That's been so removed and so stepped on. And so I, would prefer more investment in housing, et cetera, than not having it. But I think our unique approach is going to say we are people-centered and place-based, that we're not going to move outside of the permission of the neighborhood. We're not going to move outside of that relational fabric of neighborhood. What are the differences maybe have you seen in other place-based practitioners and how FCS functions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you talk about development, I mean, that's what I see most often, is that projects are conceptualized and designed to, kind of meet the needs of the neighborhood, but it's done in a way that doesn't really bring neighbors into the conversation. And I think that when you're working in places that have been disinvested for generations, you really have to take a very different intentional approach to bring neighbors into the room, and to really center them and kind of their vision for how the community should grow in the future. And we just don't see that a lot. I mean, whether it's nonprofits that are kind of planning based on their limited budget, and what they can do in a fiscal year, it's understandable that their scope is going to be, kind of narrow. But I think even with that perspective, that just collaborative tables for these organizations to come around and to sit down and to plan together, and to look at each other's budgets, to look at each other's funders, and to say, all right, are we really about really advancing positive change in this neighborhood? Are we going to try to single track this? Our 8 organizations, moving along? And I just think there's so much that can be gained to that collaborative approach, and all the while, centering what neighbors think is important. I mean, that's one of our main values here at FCS is just dignity, understanding that the perspectives and views and input from neighbors is incredibly important, and it's worth valuing and compensating at times. And I think, I think where we go wrong is we kind of assume what neighborhoods need and what neighbors need, and what they want to see happen.
Or the feedback is kind of thin and surface. This is a small example, but it represents a larger pattern of a nonprofit that a lot of their focus is like building playgrounds, in lower income neighborhoods. And so we want to get resident kind of input and feedback. And it kind of boiled down to which color slide do you want? It's like location, what's built, what features it has, when it's being built, how it's built, all the big things. Does the neighborhood even want a playground? But it's more so much as gets decided, but okay, red or blue on the slide. What seems to be right. And again, we know housing needs to be addressed. We know all these systems need to improve. So it's not rocket science at some level to say in these neighborhoods that have been oppressed and disinvested from, what do we need to do? Without looking, we could tell you here's 12 things that ought to be happening. But for us, when we're talking about holistic neighborhood development, we're asking the ecosystem. That's what we mean by the holistic pieces. We're asking the ecosystem question, and that's not just about the ecosystem of the systems. The ecosystem is the people, right? It's the people. It's the built environment. It's private. It's public. It's all the things. And so we're inviting people to say, lean into place-based work, but for us, we've even tried to articulate it by saying we're advocating not just for being place-based, not just development, but holistic neighborhood development, that there's a targeted geography that's clear, identifiable, it's known, it has history, it has story, it has identity connected to it. And the model's got to be holistic, this deeply people-rooted, multi-sector, system-wide investment. So people are saying, I'm with you. I want to lean more deeply into place-based work, even into more holistic work as a place-based practitioner. Let's end with some do's and don'ts. What would you say? Avoid this, or hey, this is an important piece of advice if you're going down this route. What kind of do's and don'ts would we offer to those that are either leaning towards place-based for the first time, or they are place-based and they're trying to get at that more holistic kind of level?
Well, the first rule I think is don't rush, right? Spend some time, get to know some people. So do meet people, do meet your neighbors, and don't rush it. I know it's anybody can build a house faster than you can sort of build a sense of neighborhood, but you're really trying to do both. And I think really mistakes are made when you build houses faster than you
build homes.
Create neighborhood. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You're trying to build homes. You're trying to build a sense of community. But I'd say that's one of the first ones for me.
Oh man. And I think we see that with some frequency of the clients that we're working with, of just and you love it and admire it, but also have to like contain it, of like, I know why it like, cause they're burdened, right? They feel so urgent to like, we need to just do something. There's so much hurt. There's so much need.
Right.
And it's like, it's good news, bad news. Like, the bad news is like, this is going to take a long time.
Right.
Good news is you can calm down. Like you can, this is decades level work.
Right.
And we need people to be in it for the long haul. Like, I love that. It just like, don't rush, be at the pace of the neighborhood. It's really good.
I think also you kind of expand that out, and putting neighborhood over organization, I think is incredibly important. Because I think we have our own goals and our own strategic plans and, our own tactics to kind of reach, whatever goals we set as an organization. But when that conflicts with what the neighborhood wants and what the neighborhood needs, that's a problem. And I think one of the big things that I respect about FCS is that, that when something is not best for the neighborhood, they divert, I mean, let's sit down and refigure this. Let's figure out a way to get the neighborhood what it needs, instead of just kind of barreling forward with.
And we could lean on our own expertise. Like, hey, we've been at this for over 40 years. We look at the results of all the work that we've done. We're the experts in the space. We're the developers. We know what's happening, but the ability to hit major, even what and we're not just an outside presence who's like, oh, we're just assuming, like, we've been in this neighborhood for 20 years. Like, half of our staff live here. We have an intimate personal knowledge of this place, so we could justify ourselves in getting out ahead. But that practice of saying the neighborhood has priority over the organization's mission, budget, priorities, etc.
Yeah, I don't know if that lesson was learned with mistakes. Sometimes you have to pay a stupid tax to really learn that lesson.
We paid our lion's share in that.
But I do respect the way that FCS really does try not to overfunction, right? Like you said, we do have a lot of expertise. We bring in a lot of, whether it's financially or even intangibly, there are some assets that we're bringing into the neighborhood, but to still ask and still build those relationships and still work it with and at the direction of the neighborhood association, the civic league. I just think that's a honoring way to, bring dignity to the neighborhood and also not overfunction as an organization.
Yeah. I like your reference of stupid taxes. I think one of the do's would be really honest and be willing to fail and own the failure, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't think it's possible to do this work and to not mess up and to not make bad judgments and bad decisions. And I think anybody who's in this work has plenty of critics on the outside. And it's like, I'd rather be criticized and just be getting my hands dirty and be in the middle of it, because this is really hard.
Yeah.
It's really long term. And you're just going to do it poorly at some point in time. But do you have the staying power to do relationally reparative work, right?
That's
can
good.
You can you invest in that? Because sometimes when people look for the FCSs of the world, like, hey, who's done it for a long time, who has some expertise, like part of what they're trying to do, and I get it, is like to avoid failure. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to get it wrong. I want to get it right.
Sure.
And I remember a client group being like, how do we do this right? And I'm like, well, first stop asking how to do it right. Because there's a fundamental assumption that there's just a mechanism or method, and that'll prevent us from messing up. It's like,
right.
Just be willing to mess up and repair and move. But
I think that desire to get it right is really powerful. For our own kind of valuation of ourselves and our efforts, but how others see us too. I think, and sometimes, that messes with the dynamic of the practitioner and neighborhood residents. I think one of the lessons that I've had to learn over the years that I see really lived out here at FCS is not stepping in to do something for a neighborhood that it can do for itself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
that your way is not going to be necessarily the best. You know, sometimes we feel like we can get things done really quickly.
Yeah.
That we've got the plan. We just, you know, move forward, build a team, move forward. You know, but I think one of the unfortunate byproducts of the racism and discrimination that we see in a lot of our communities is that people have been left out of the mix for so long. They don't necessarily see themselves, you know, as possibly being leaders in their own community. And I think that leadership potential really has to be nurtured. And people have to be invested in and kind of called up and called into those leadership roles, and understand that the neighborhood is an appropriate place for that, for their leadership to be acted out, you know, and for them to kind of test their wings and, you know, find their groove in terms of really driving that positive change that they want to see around them.
Yeah. If you build all the things that don't build people and power, you've missed it. Like for us, and I think there are place-based groups that are doing the bricks and sticks.
Right.
And we would say you can't do it without that unless you've got lots of time, lots of energy, lots of expertise, and lots of money to do the bricks and sticks, like to build the things. But if you're not building power, building local agency, then it's like, at least in our book, like we would say, that's not holistic neighborhood development. Right? Those are place-based development projects that are necessary and important. Yes, better schools is better. You know, more affordable housing is better. Like safer streets is better. That's all wonderful, but it does remove that. For us, like the core of it all is that deeply human dynamic of the people.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to be the amen corner, but I really think what you said, Stephen, is so key. I mean, people deserve to be invested in, and don't just invest in houses and buildings and shops and businesses. Invest in people. Yeah, people are the solution, not the problem. Yeah. And I just think that sometimes we as developers or community development groups, we get it twisted. We think that the house will solve the problem. Yeah. No, it's like the people are the solution, and they can help build those houses. They'll make those houses into homes. They'll make those businesses thrive. But they, like you said, especially after generations of being disempowered, they need to be empowered. And I think that's part of the learning curve too, is to really empower people of color and bring up to the leadership roles, listen to them, empathize, and learn to follow their lead.
That's really good. And I think that's the tension of what we talk about is like part of where we led in this conversation initially is like, love that you care about individual people, you know, love that you can focus at that level, but that's not the unit of change. And now we're like, hey, you got to put people at the center. But that's kind of is like with the mindset of the neighborhood ecosystem.
That's
right. To see that person as a placed person, right? As a member of an ecosystem that all the love in the world for that individual is going to falter if you're not dealing with the environment that they're seeing every day, right? You can love that child or that family, but what they walk out and face off of their front porch every day, right? What they can and can't access, that's the unit, that's the system there. You know, I think one final advice for those place-based folks, maybe to point them to a separate episode on our community development process model, is we have this kind of 3-part framework of saying assessment, alignment, activation. Our community development model is a process model. It's not, here's the things you have to replicate to do it the way we do it. It's more to say, here, this is the process we follow that gets us where we are. And it is assess first, align second, activate third. And when I think, again, feeling the urgency, the pressure of this work, we can assess the realities on the ground and then jump to activation, or we can have some alignment with neighbors that we all want to work together, and then we want to activate some plans. But the not rushing, like do the diligence of assessment and really understanding the history and the story of this place, understanding the present reality of this place, right? And doing good, deep engagement with people, with neighborhood. And in that say, well, let's align around what we care about. Now that we've done the diligence of assessment and learning, let's have a common alignment and commitment to our future. Now let's activate. Now let's move. Right. And then continue. And we don't put that on a straight line. We put that in a circle. This is the loop that you're always playing in. Yeah. The end. I don't know how to end these things. It's like landing a plane. Just drop the plane. I don't know how to land it. Silly voices, anybody? Silly voices for Becca? Or is there anything else we should add or redo or Becca?
Just a thought that as you were talking about the process model, it strikes me that it takes place within relationship. And like relationship building is happening like every step of the way. That these are not like discrete timelines where it's like, okay, we're going to do this for 3 months and then we're going to pause and then we're going to do this. Like,
don't need to talk to you anymore. We're done.
Yeah. If you've been really effective at inviting partners to the table and centering it around neighbors and, giving dignity and honor to those voices of residents, every step of that is going to be about building relationship and building trust so that when you get to a place to act, you've got people who are invested in that, who are working in that space, living in that space, because we're not trying to create healthy ecosystems from like flat ground, from like a blank canvas. You are taking an unhealthy ecosystem, and really trying to infuse equity and justice and, all of these things to even get people up to zero and then build a healthy ecosystem on top of that, so you don't do that just by having a great model like it is, but or a process, it has to be really surrounded by that intentional relationship building.
Which is why that principle of you move at the speed of trust is you can really betray that trust quickly, or it can all be blown away. And
are you willing to slow down?
Right.
When that happens.
Right.
Yeah. When it happens, because it will. Like
it will.
You can't, I don't think it's possible for any individual friendship to not have moments of lost trust, much less like an organization in a neighborhood and civically leaders. And I mean, there's, which again, it's like why having multiple, like a significant part of staff living in among a neighbor, like, because this is their home too. This isn't just their mission or charity project or this is my life, this is my neighborhood, this is my kids are growing up, this is like this means as much to me. Even if I quit working here, I would care this deeply because this is home, because that just means like we got to be in the repairing of those relationships when it happens that we've lost trust.
That's right.
Place Matters is produced by Focused Community Strategies, whose mission is to partner with under-resourced neighborhoods to provide innovative and holistic development that produces flourishing communities and God's shalom. Place Matters is hosted by FCS's training and consulting team, known as the Lupton Center. If you would like to inquire about our training and consulting services, please reach out to us via our website or find us on LinkedIn and social media. This information can be found in the show notes. If you would like to watch these episodes, the videos can be found on our YouTube channel. And if you like these episodes, please share them on social media. Your support means a lot to us. This show was edited by Tim Rhodes with music by Eric North. Special thanks to David Park and Becca Malpass at FCS for their work in organizing and recording these sessions. We'd also like to say thank you to our partner, Lilly Endowment, whose Thriving Congregations grant has made this podcast possible.